Hello and welcome back to the world of Assassin's Creed. Today is our first in our three-part series on the combat systems of the first Assassin's Creed games. In today's analysis of Assassin's Creed, we'll talk about enemy types, the weapons that are used in the game, as well as some of the strategies that players can employ. Without any further ado, let's jump right into our first episode of the Assassin's Creed combat series. Players will remember hammering a counterattack button while 12 guards patiently wait their turn to try their hand at you. But that is far from the whole story when it comes to Assassin's Creed combat, and so our first topic will be enemy types, followed by the weapons of the world and the combat strategies. Without any further ado, here we go. The original Assassin's Creed takes place during the Third Crusade, placing players between two massive armies and tasking them with assassinating members from both sides. This is a fantastic concept that was well received in its time. Assassin's Creed allows players to infiltrate Acre, Damascus, and Jerusalem, as well as the kingdom between the three, in order to complete their contracts. This puts players into conflict with members of the Crusader army, which just recently occupied Acre, as well as the Saracens in the latter two. Fortunately, Richard III and Saladin were nice enough to split their forces into three major groups. Let's start with the first one, and the weakest of the three, Infantrymen and Militia. Within both the Crusaders and the Saracens, these are the lowest of the low, equipped with basic armor. Relatively, they are inexperienced, and they're prone to flee under duress. The elite or sergeant group are the mid-level troops in either army, and are a bit more robust and hardy than the infantrymen. They have better armor and know more combat techniques. The leader/commander rank are the best that either army have to offer. They have impressive armor, they deal serious damage, and are familiar with countering and dodging, making them enormously frustrating to deal with in combat. There are also subtypes, such as archers, but these are typically just infantrymen who have been equipped with bows rather than their own unique type. The best way players can identify what they are dealing with of the three major groups is by the outfit. In particular, what I find useful is to just look at the hat. For Saracens, dark turbans identify the infantrymen, a golden metal helmet indicates that the enemy is an elite, and a silver and cloth helmet points out that this enemy is a leader/commander. For Crusaders, across the Lionheart, Teutonic, and Hospitaller factions in the army, which adds a little bit of confusion but not too much, this roughly translates to no helmet is the equivalent of an infantryman. A partial face covering helmet is the equivalent of an elite or a sergeant, and a full helmet indicates that the enemy is a leader or a commander. Now let's talk about weapons. Fortunately for me, the weapon list for the original Assassin's Creed is limited. A brutally efficient weapon that obviously makes its first appearance here. In this iteration, this blade is almost exclusively useful for stealth purposes. Once a player has found themselves in open conflict, this game works to encourage them to switch to another weapon. A sneakily useful weapon in Assassin's Creed because it is the only ranged option for Altair. Almost always, these knives function as a one-shot kill. These are essential for dealing with the obnoxious archers I mentioned before. Also known as the long dagger, this weapon trades the sheer force of the regular sword for speed. It allows for the use of throwing knives, making it a useful weapon in most situations and my personal favorite. Lastly, we have the sword, and this is the main weapon in Assassin's Creed, and that's for good reason. It deals the most amount of damage and is the least likely to be countered by enemies. Engaging the enemy. Now let's get into some more of the meat of the combat system. The way in which Assassin's Creed breaks down moves is by offense or defense, so we'll do that as well.
Altair, it seems my students do not fully understand what it is to wield the blade. Perhaps you could show them what you know.
Let's start with the step. By pressing the legs option, the player can increase or decrease the gap between them and the enemy. Following this is the grab, which tasks the player to use the unarmed button to grab and toss enemies away. Then we have the general attack, which can be turned into a heavy attack by holding down the button, or a lighter but quicker attack by tapping. The combo kill is a variant attack within Assassin's Creed that asks players to tap the attack button again the moment they strike an opponent.
Of a master.
The final thing I will mention is the defense break, which happens when a player steps in on an enemy and then attack. This move breaks the defense and opens them up again for a killing blow.
And that, my students, is how we all should fight.
Now on to the defense, which is what I think most players probably remember. Fortunately, by default holding the high profile trigger, hits are basically going to be blocked almost all the time. Players can also dodge using the legs button, which will open up opponents to an attack. The counter grab only comes into play when opponents grab Altair, and this can be turned lethal if players aim their target at scaffolding and off of roofs or at shops. Finally, there is what most players probably used, the counterattack, most impressive and probably the most fun aspect of defense in this game. Pressing the arm button with the right timing takes out the opponent in a spectacular fashion. The combat in Assassin's Creed will never be as complicated as some players wish, but with the right amount of practice, players can make it quite satisfying. While some likely remember having dozens of guards surround them, waiting their turn, mixing up the different techniques in the game can actually make that more enjoyable and less frustrating to see. It all relies on timing and assessing the strategies that the next opponent will employ. And that will conclude part 1 of our series on the Assassin's Creed combat systems. Thank you so much for watching. I make the videos for myself, so if anyone else can enjoy them, that's great too. Check back next time for more Assassin's Creed content.